Hello, Eric Walczykowski here, CEO of Bespoke Partners and host of Tailored Talent. Today, I'm joined by Rob Greenhalgh from Summit Leadership. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We both do a lot of work in software and SaaS. Talk to me about some of the unique attributes of successful software and SaaS companies.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually did some research. I pulled some research together for our conversation today, and so just wanted to share a little bit. Actually, I'll share just one data piece. It's not exclusive to software companies or tech companies, but I think is kind of very relevant to the conversation we're having today. And so we did some research at Summit, and we found that 51% of private equity investors believe that building a high-performing management team is the most critical area for their CEOs. And so it just kind of goes back to the conversation we had earlier on around how important it is to not only have the right players on the management team, but also have them highly functioning with one another.
That's an amazing statistic. And I like to share, it's funny because how I actually got into this business about 5 years ago is I kind of looked at the tailwind within private equity and talent. And I go back to the late 90s, and I had a professor at Northwestern who had done 2 private equity stints as an operator. And he used to famously stand in front of the class in a big booming voice and said, "Do you bet on the horse or do you bet on the jockey?" And he's an operator. And so in the late 90s, it was like, you bet on the jockey all day, every day. But I think if we had surveyed private equity back in the 90s, they would have said, hey, financial returns are driven by proprietary deal flow and financial engineering. Those are the 2 things that drive outsized results. And I think as we've seen the evolution over the last 25 years, people have started to wake up to this idea of talent, and talent matters, and the mix of talent. And I think we still have a long way to go. I mean, 51% is great, but I think as you and I might agree, those management teams that are executing the value creation, sure, if you buy the right property and you engineer it right, you can get results. But if you buy the right property, you financially engineer it right, and you have an amazing team, wow, the results are just off the charts.
And I'll add something to that. I think after you have the right management team, you have to make sure that the system works. And what I mean about that is that's the structure and operating model piece of it, right? I think one of the things I've seen a lot in some of the work that I've done is how many times a CEO or a leader will point the finger at a leader for underperforming and not step back and recognize that leader's operating in a system. And so if the system isn't working, it's much easier to blame the person than it is to do the work to figure out what might be contributing to that. And so one of the things that when I do my coaching, I advise clients is if you have one of your executives that's underperforming, we definitely need to take a look at it. I'm a firm believer that you need to address performance issues quickly, and you need to change out talent quickly as well. And just how much value destruction goes on when you let that drag on for too long. But I think that the thing we have to be cautious about is it's really easy to jump to the assumption it's the leader or it's the person versus it's the person operating in a system that may not be setting that person up for success.
What other numbers do you have for me based on your research?
Yeah, so this is actually SaaS specific. So this actually comes from the Entropy survey that I mentioned a little bit earlier on in our conversation. And so one of the stats we found is that SaaS team members rated, there's an item on the survey around, is the company structured in a way that is aligned to its priorities? And what we found, the difference between SaaS and non-SaaS companies is that with SaaS companies, they were actually 38% less likely to say that our company is structured around in the right way to execute our priorities.
Interesting.
So it's a really interesting stat because one, we both know, right? Tech companies, all companies, but tech companies especially, are evolving and changing very quickly. And so we'll come back to this agility. This is around organizational structure agility. Are we reorganizing the company? And you don't want to be doing that too often. But as the ecosystem outside the company is changing, as our strategy is evolving, are we taking the time to also make sure that we're structured in the right way and that the way that work gets done, the operating rhythm, is aligned to kind of the new directions that the company might be moving in? And we just saw a pretty significant difference on that one dimension between SaaS and non-SaaS companies. Part of it might be explained by the fact that maybe technology companies do change faster than other companies, and so there's a lag to get caught up there. I'll give you one more statistic that we thought was really, really interesting. This is actually coming from the same survey. And what we found is that SaaS team members are 17% less likely to be at their company a year from now as compared to non-SaaS companies, which not surprising necessarily, right? There's a lot of turnover in tech. Switching costs at tech companies can be lower than maybe in other industries. But I think it does reinforce the burning platform, to your point, where if people and human capital are our most important asset, there's a high cost of retention. And this conversation's been happening for years and years and years around what's the cost of retention. And then you layer on culture because everybody has different motivations, and some people are more motivated by money, and other people are more motivated by their purpose. But at the end of the day, one of the big motivations for most people is the experience they're having at the company that they're at. And so if we're seeing in SaaS companies that there is more turnover or more likely turnover, what can we create in terms of the culture and the employee value proposition that will make them less likely to move somewhere else because there's a higher tendency in tech companies for that to happen.
But just curious, what have you seen as best practice around making sure that works? Because the cost of the bad hire, and a lot of it really comes down to culture. Do people know what they're getting themselves into?
Yeah. So, a lot of what we do is assessment. So different kinds of assessment. There's the assessments we do for executives when they're coming from outside the organization. We also do assessments for succession planning, which has actually become a lot more popular now in private equity because of the longer hold periods. And, CEOs are like, I signed up for 4 years. I'm not sure I want to be here for 7. So, do we have successors in the ranks? And when we're doing those assessments, we're looking for experiences they've had. We're looking for their capabilities. But I'll tell you 2 other things we're looking for that are really, really important is, how well do they align with the success attributes, which are essentially leadership competencies of the, and when we're interviewing them, we're looking for very concrete examples, not, what did they read in the textbook last night, but like, how have they demonstrated some of these leadership principles in the work that they've done in the past? And so, we're both kind of in a similar space that we're always, assessing and trying to figure out, who's the right talent we want to bring on board to an organization. But, being very clear and having that built into the interview process and having candidates really talk about concrete examples, not philosophical stuff that they think is the right thing to say. And then the other thing I'll tell you, Eric, that I think is so important and we're focusing even more on is context. So, what was the context around this individual that may have either, been tailwinds for them or headwinds for them? And how is that similar or different from the context that they're walking into? And so it's kind of the combination of like, do they have the right leadership experience, principle, or are they wired and aligned with the leadership principles that the company has articulated and how they demonstrated that in the past? And then how is that kind of married up with the context that they are coming from, and how similar or different is that from what they're working? Because we've all seen situations where people have been really successful at one place and totally failed at another place. Yep. And I think one of the, a couple of the reasons that happens is we get over-indexed on just like their capabilities, and we're not paying enough attention to their leadership wiring and how similar is that to the culture we're trying to develop. And then also, how much of their big wins in the past were because of tailwinds and the context they were in versus what do they really actually contribute to that success?
Yep, absolutely. And so look, I love the notion of the individual and what did they contribute to the success. But I think by and large, a lot of people dig into that. But I think your point on context, there are not a lot of people that look at the entire team and how does this person come in as a culture add to that team? Because we all know diversity is important, but there's that diversity of thought that becomes an add to the culture versus, hey, someone is like everybody that's going to derail the plan, or someone that's going to be so disruptive in this culture. And by the way, all of that context has nothing to do with whether this person can be a successful executive or not. It's, can they be a successful executive in this environment? What a great point.
I'll just add one more piece of this. So, when we're doing our talent assessments, we use the Hogan personality suite to be able to get a sense of, what is this person's, what's under the hood in terms of this person's personality. And when we're doing a lot of the team coaching, we'll do Hogan's for the entire team. And so we'll get a sense of like how homogeneous or not is this team? Where are there differences in personality that might be contributing to the dynamics on the team? And I'll tell you something else that I'm hearing a lot more of these days, and I love it, is that between CEOs and management teams, some PE firms will actually have deal partners take the Hogan's as well to get a better read on just that working relationship between the CEO and management team and the deal. I think I love that. I hope more firms do that in the future. But
So Rob, I'll tell you a funny story. So I have a Hogan heat map of my table, which is my top ELT members and my functional partners on my desk. And I was introduced to this when I joined Bespoke through the process in 2020. And as I saw this, and got the debrief on the heat map, my career flashed through my eyes and I saw faces of people that I hired and worked well. I hired and didn't work well. I led well, I didn't lead well. And had I have had this information, I could have helped navigate some of these situations. And look, as we know, the Hogan is a tool. It's not the be all end all, but it is a tool. And there are things that can guide interactions to gain alignment in whether your leadership, how your team's working together, and ultimately how they're driving value in the organization. And so I love that you guys do that. Rob, this was a wealth of information. I truly enjoyed our conversation, and candidly, if you're in the Bay at some point, would love to get together with you and continue this. But
if you're in the Bay Area, yeah, my family's from there, so I'll be there in a few weeks actually.
Fantastic. Love to connect in person. But thanks for joining today, and thanks for being a great partner at Summit. The work you do is very valuable to our ecosystem, and look forward to doing more of it together.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and really appreciate the collaboration as well. So thank you, and we'll talk soon.